Hey guys, it's Codiak here, Raid Leader for Exiled Power. Today we'll be looking at the 5th encounter in the Tomb of Sargeras, the Sisters of the Moon. Throughout this video we'll be looking at the fight mechanics, your responsibilities as a DPS, tank, or healer, and discuss execution of the fight from various points of view. To navigate to a specific section of the video, please follow the section breakdown at the top of your screen. Overview. Sisters of the Moon is a 3-phase council encounter where your raid will be fighting one of 3 bosses at any given point throughout the fight. Players will start by facing the Huntress. At 70%, the Huntress will turn into a spirit and raiders will begin fighting Captain Moonstrike. Once Captain Moonstrike reaches 40%, she will return to her spirit form and your raid will have to deal with Priestess Lunaspire. Throughout the encounter, you will have to deal with mechanics from all 3 bosses, as well as an environmental mechanic called Font of Elune. Lust. Lusting at the start of the encounter will provide your team with the biggest DPS boost. If your team is struggling to kill Moon Talon in Phase 2 or dealing with the Embrace of the Eclipse in Phase 3, your team may opt to Lust then. Key abilities. Font of Elune is a mechanic present throughout the fight. The room will transition between light and dark, applying a dot that increases the damage you take by that specific side by 3% for each stack. This stacking dot can be removed by transitioning to the other side of the room. Tracking your stacks of Lunar Suffusion and Umbra Suffusion is vital to the success of your raid. When the floor is covered entirely by either light or dark, the Font of Elune will be empowered and trigger the boss's most powerful abilities. Next, I'll cover the main abilities from Phase 1. Your raid will be fighting Huntress Casperin. Tanks should stand close to each other to share the damage from Moonglaive. This glaive hits the primary target and bounces to nearby players. The Moonglaive will apply a debuff that reduces the healing and absorption you take. To clear this debuff, tanks must trigger Astral Purge by moving to the other side of the room. The Huntress's second ability is Twilight Glaive. This is a piercing projectile that will shoot out from the boss, indicated by a red arrow. Once the glaive reaches its apex, it will return in a straight line back to the boss, damaging any players it hits in the process. During Phase 1, the Priestess and Captain will be casting abilities that the raid will have to handle, even though they aren't targetable. Priestess's main ability is Moonburn. This applies a 30-second debuff to players dealing ticking damage. To remove this debuff, players must trigger Astral Purge by running to the opposite side of the room. During Phase 1, Captain Moonstrike will also be casting Twilight Volley. This is a simple rain of arrows ability that players need to move out of to avoid taking damage. When the Font of Elune is empowered in Phase 1, Captain Moonstrike will cast Incorporeal Shot. This is very similar to Mistress Sazine's Hydra Shot and must be soaked by a raid team to evenly split the damage. During Phase 2, Captain Moonstrike becomes active. One of her abilities is called Summon Moon Talon. This new add needs to be tanked and killed off quickly. At 25%, Moon Talon will begin casting Deathly Screech. This ramps up in intensity and will do serious amounts of damage to your raid team. In Phase 2, the Huntress maintains her Twilight Glaive ability, which is dealt with the same way as in Phase 1. Her new ability is called Spectral Glaive, which targets a random player and bounces to 3 nearby players. You can attempt to reduce the impact of this ability by spreading out. During Phase 2, the Priestess maintains her Moonburn and Lunar Strike abilities. However, she gains a new ability called Embrace of the Eclipse. This ability is only cast when Font of Elune is empowered. Absorption Shield will be placed on every raider and on Captain Moonstrike. Healers must heal up friendly raiders and DPS must nuke down the shield on Captain to avoid fatal damage. After 12 seconds, your shields will explode, dealing the remaining damage based on the amount of healing and damage left on the absorbed shields. You may need to save DPS cooldowns to get through this ability. Once Captain hits 40%, Phase 3 will begin. Priestess Lunaspire will become active and your raid will end the fight attacking her. Her Lunar Strike ability has been replaced by Lunar Fire. This is a tank dot that must be dropped to reduce fatal tank damage. Simply perform a tank swap to avoid tank deaths. Priestess also gains the Lunar Beacon ability. After a short duration, an Arcane Barrage will descend on a player. Simply move away from the raid to avoid the high amount of damage and silencing effect of the ability. During Phase 3, Huntress will gain a new ability called Glaive Storm. This is only active when the Font of Elune is empowered. The Huntress will throw a glaive to the center of the encounter area that will explode, sending out smaller glaives towards the edges of the room. Avoid these at all costs. Tanks. In Phase 1, stand close to each other to share damage from Moonglaive. The tank that receives the Discorporate debuff should quickly trigger Astral Purge and drop the dot. When the Font of Elune is active, help soak the Incorporeal Shot. In Phase 2, make sure one tank is picking up Moon Talon. In Phase 3, alternate taking the Priestess to keep your stacks of Lunar Fire under control. Before Glaive Storm goes out, position the boss at the side of the room to avoid any awkward boss overlap and position mechanics. Healers. Random players will take damage throughout this fight. Pay attention to players being targeted by certain abilities and spot heal them as needed. Healing cooldowns will be required during the various empowered Font of Elune abilities. During Embrace of the Eclipse, quickly heal off your raid team's shields to avoid massive damage from the explosion. DPS. In Phase 1, players will need to help soak the incorporeal shot during the empowered Font of Elune. In Phase 2, make sure all DPS are killing Moon Talon, as this ad needs to die as soon as possible. DPS should be saving cooldowns for the shield that applies to Captain Moonstrike during Embrace of the Eclipse. Overall, DPS have the largest responsibility to move out of the raid when targeted by the various player-specific abilities. The overlap of mechanics will compound, and your healers will definitely yell at you if you drop mechanics in the middle of the room. Positioning. Due to the Font of Elune changing between light and dark, the raid will have to move frequently from one side of the room to the other to avoid high stacks of suffusion. During Phase 3, make sure to position the boss at the side of the room before Glaive Storm to avoid excess damage and maximize your DPS. During Embrace of the Eclipse, players may want to stack up to help your healers do some AoE healing, but quickly spread out to avoid any unnecessary damage from the glaives. Heroic changes. On Heroic difficulty, your raid team will have to deal with 2 Empowered Fonts of Elune per phase, as opposed to 1. During Phase 1, players will have to deal with both Incorporeal Shot and Embrace of the Eclipse. In Phase 2, players will deal with both Embrace of the Eclipse and Glaive Storm. In Phase 3, players will deal with Glaive Storm and Incorporeal Shot. It's important to note that these spells should not overlap. We have encountered some bugs which causes both abilities to occur at once. Players will just need to think ahead to the next empowerment and plan accordingly. Final notes. This fight is complicated on paper, but ultimately is all about personal responsibility. If you're targeted with a mechanic, move to the proper location in the room. Make sure to keep your stacks of suffusion down and handle each empowerment properly to keep your raid's overall damage taken down. If you have any questions about this encounter, please leave them in the comment section below. We'd be happy to help you with any issues your team may be having on this encounter. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you've liked this video, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. That's all for this video. We'll see you next time.